Hello and welcome to the Reversing Climate Change podcast. I'm Ross Kenyon. I am a climate tech and carbon removal entrepreneur. I read a book. I liked it so much that I wanted to invite the author on. His name is Urbina. He wrote this book called The Outlaw Ocean: Journeys Across the Last Untamed Frontier. It's an amazing set of chapters that chronicles bad behavior at sea. Much of the book is about sea slavery and about how people will take these contracts that will get them into fishing work. And it ends up being very parallel to stories you'd hear about company towns in the US where you'd be paid in scrip and you can never really earn enough to leave. These contracts were ostensibly entered into voluntarily, but they basically just become a form of human trafficking, and it's much more common than you might think. So we talk about labor issues that take place on the high seas. We talk about illegal fishing and how common that is too, and what it means to bring illegal fishers to justice. And that involves Ian trying to catch up with some of the ships from the Sea Shepherd organization, trying to join their pursuit of an illegal fisher. We spent some time talking about ocean iron fertilization, which I've been really interested in recently. By coincidence, I've been in touch with several ocean iron fertilization people lately. And culturally, they're a really interesting type of person because it's one of those techniques that inspires silver bullet thinking, which if they're right, it truly is a silver bullet. But it is also the most polarizing carbon removal technique or possible technique that ever gets brought up, essentially. I was at a Marine CDR meetup recently, and I asked someone whose opinion I respect if there's a there essentially. And the there that I'm asking about is, can you pour iron filings into certain parts of the ocean where much biological growth, especially for very small types of marine life, is iron limited. So by adding iron, you will produce a bloom of life, and this could feed fish. And then the hope is that these small critters drift down to the ocean floor and become relatively immobilized carbon and becomes a type of carbon removal. And this person just said, like, yeah, that doesn't work. It doesn't get that far down. And it just ends up cycling through the top layers of the ocean. I don't meet a lot of people who are neutral parties on it. The people who get into it get really into it. And if they're right, then basically all the other types of carbon removal become irrelevant because of the price and the scale of action that is available to them. But many of the marine scientists with whom I speak are deeply skeptical, at least, if not actively hostile. So that's a fun one to talk to Ian about, that's deep in the carbon removal weeds. We also just spend a fair amount of time talking about the nature of journalism. I really liked this book and Ian's writing because I think he does try to honor the stories of people that, even those who are not noble people, but they're also people who are just trying to get by and feed their family. And I can tell that the book was written with a fair amount of empathy in a place where it would be much easier to blame them and call them terrible people. And we talk about why that's important and how journalism is changing too, because right now it's really unclear what's going to play out with the Trump administration. I'm hearing a lot about the various ways in which people are self-censoring or changing the way that they're talking about their work so as they don't face retaliatory action from the administration. And that's news publications, philanthropies. It's an interesting time. And Ian, despite working for and writing for a number of very prominent newspapers and publications, he founded the Outlaw Ocean Project, which is his nonprofit, where he's able to make sure reportage on these topics gets financed, gets produced, and gets distributed. So if you like this content, one, go read his book, The Outlaw Ocean. It's very fun. It's a great listen too. If you like audiobooks, it's sort of like the perfect kind of nonfiction to listen to. It reads very well that way. It isn't the easiest thing to write copy that reads well. So that's a testament to skill. And if you'd like to support his organization, the link is in the show notes. Thanks so much for listening. If you like this show, please do me the favor of becoming a paid subscriber. It's $5 a month, gets you ad-free listening and bonus content. It helps keep the show alive, helps to grow it. It is really important to me. If you love the show, but you can't do $5 a month, if you could give me a great rating and or review in Apple Podcasts, Spotify, whichever podcast app that you use, that is also massively appreciated. And thank you so much for your support. Here is your show. Thanks for being here, Ian.
Thanks for having me.
It's my pleasure. You tell so many stories in your book, The Outlaw Ocean, about what happens at sea. Most of them pretty horrible. I'm trying to think if there's any really happy ones in there. What's happened since the book's publication, and is the trajectory nearly as grim as you present?
Well, I mean, I present what I think is accurate, and I think it is probably even darker than what I captured because, there were so many stories I just couldn't get to. What's happened since the story is, I spent 2 years doing a series called The Outlaw Ocean for the Times, and then went out and did the book. And then after the book, I kind of was changed as a journalist, and so I decided to open a nonprofit news organization called the Outlaw Ocean Project, and to keep doing these kinds of stories. So that's what's happened in the 5 years since.
Wow. What made it on the cutting room floor?
Sort of smaller things that I touch on but didn't go as deep in. I mean, conspicuously missing in the book were China, like the biggest fleet out there. I couldn't really find a way to tackle the largest and most opaque fleet on the water, which is China. So that's one thing that we spent 3 years at the nonprofit pursuing as a story. And then another huge story that didn't make it in the book that I chased afterwards was the migration crisis on the Mediterranean and sort of the horrific stories of what is happening to folks as they attempt to cross the Mediterranean to make their way to Europe. That was also a story I couldn't figure out. It was clearly an outlaw ocean story because there was human rights and environmental angles and real pathos and an investigative potential, but I couldn't figure out how to do it new and fresh, so I just didn't touch it. But then I did so after I finished the book. So those are two examples.
You mean just showing up in Lampedusa or something like that is just not new enough or not a fresh enough angle for you?
Yeah, I mean, yes, there'd been amazing reporting. The bar was really high, including out of Lampedusa. What I wanted to do was, number one, find something that felt like no one had done before. And the first window on that was a piece I did after the book about these cruise vessels that Italy had rented. There were 5 at the time, huge cruise vessels, and they were housing, thousands of migrants there to keep them off land and to sort of manage how they were going to handle them. No journalists had been allowed on board any of those vessels. And I thought, well, if I could get on there, it would be pretty amazing just to see what the conditions are like and to talk with those who were there. And so we orchestrated a way to get on board by working with the Red Cross, a photographer, and I. And so that was the first exposure. And then in producing that story, we were hearing horrific stuff out of Libya. The folks launch from different places, but Libya is one of the biggest launching spots. And so many of the most gruesome stories were coming from folks who had launched from Libya. So the next thing we wanted to do was, okay, if we're going to do that story well, then we need to go into Libya. And so that is logistically very, very tough. It's a super dangerous place. And so that was the next big investigation we did, was going into Libya and looking deeply at, kind of how the EU is funding the capture and detention of folks in Libya, especially, and what happens to those people when they're detained in the gulags that exist in Libya.
The beat is so interesting, and there's so much variability in what you can cover with the ocean being your main subject. Why isn't this more supportable or fundable by mainstream publications?
For the reasons of the first part of your sentence, in that it's really sprawling and simply by dint of the geography, it means everything takes longer and time costs in the business of journalism. So the price point of doing good journalism, I mean, there's always been good journalism on the oceans written from shore, but it's limited, right? It's oftentimes rewrite of academic studies, and it's usually from an environmental lens, all very important and worthy, but very narrow, right? And so if you're going to try to tell human stories and human rights or labor stories plus environmental stories, you really got to get out in the space. That adds a huge amount of time and cost, sometimes a little bit of a danger factor as well. And so all those things make, the editors or the business bosses above them or the Wall Street financiers above them who run papers not so thrilled about those stories that take 6 months a year to produce rather than producing 6 stories a week.
So it's private equity's fault, basically.
Partially, yeah. Yeah.
How's it going now that you have your own shop?
It's good. Yeah. I mean, I couldn't be happier. It's tough. I was only ever a journalist. I was a cultural anthropologist, then a journalist. And so I'd never run, an organization, small though we are, it just works different muscles to manage people and kind of all the duties that entails. But I quite like it. We're funded, 2/3 by foundation philanthropies. We stick with the ones that really know journalism and are pretty accustomed to the rules that are needed to protect journalism to be unduly influenced by funders. So we have a bunch of funders in that space. And then 1/3 of our funding comes from just average folks who think it's unusual and they want to give $2 a month or something like that, So we're in decent shape and we're producing stuff I'm really proud of. And I have a really amazing team with me now.
Could you explain the mechanics of sea slavery? It seems you would expect more people to come back from that experience and warn people to not take these debt deals to illegally migrate to some other country and get ensnared into this. But it seems very common. It's disgusting how pernicious and common it is actually in reading this.
Yeah, I mean, I think the reasons for it not being more known are several. One is shame and sort of a sense of embarrassment. Oftentimes, you're dealing with a demographic who might be, small village inlander, right, in country X, Indonesia, Philippines, Thailand, wherever. So they're probably from a global South country. They're probably pretty poor. They're probably inland and village based. So they're not super savvy. They're not coastal, port near, very savvy about what the work looks like. They're pretty desperate. They're often illiterate. Sometimes they're trafficked or they're undocumented crossing borders. All right. So all those demographic variables mean you have someone who, oftentimes had to borrow money just to get the job because there are these upfront fees. You got to pay your own flight to Busan, South Korea to board the ship, and you got to pay the manning agency to get your licenses and paperwork. And so you end up borrowing money from your cousin, your uncle, your friend in your village. So you're already in debt at the outset, and you've sold this opportunity to them as one that's hopeful and promising and a good bet, right? And so then year and a half, 2 years later, you come back with your tail between your legs and you don't really have any money to show for it and some bad stuff happened. You kind of feel embarrassed, right? So the shame factor means you're probably not going to talk about it too openly when you get back home. The second factor is often blacklisting. Oddly, irrationally, a lot of these guys, and this is a mostly male workforce, if they speak ill of the manning agency, the employment firm that hired them, or the ship, the fishing company, the ship captain, whatever, word gets round and they don't have another chance at it. And crazy, if you're abused, why are you trying to go again? If you don't have many options and the only job in town is at the local Five and Dime or whatever, or on the rice paddy, you might say, well, I gambled, I lost, but I'm heading back to the casino because I might win, right? Like this is what we humans do. Hope springs eternal, for better or worse. So I think the desire to not speak ill and then get a bad rap and therefore be locked out of job options is another factor that prevents folks from talking openly about what happened to them. And sometimes it's more than just blacklisting. If you speak of what happened to you in these small places, in these small villages, they will come for you. Someone will go and either say, "Hey, look, we said we would pay you a concession fee for what happened to you, but we've heard you've been bad mouthing us, and not only we're not paying you a concession fee, but we're going to teach you a lesson." So that is not typical, but is not uncommon either. So I think these are probably the biggest factors. It's also just like, these are places where word isn't traveling very far about certain things. Good news travels further than bad news, I would just say. And so when someone comes back to the village and things went okay for them, and this does happen, and they earned well and they got paid and no one got beaten up and the contract was the contract, and they come back and now they pay off the people they borrowed from and they bought a new moped and they put a new roof on their mom's house. Like that gets around. Like, hey, did you see so-and-so got back from his job at sea and he's doing pretty well. He's got new sneakers and he's got a new moped and that word travels further than the opposite, which tends to be whispered when things don't go well.
Wow. Yeah. Someone, your cousin, your coworker won $1,500 at the slot machine, but they pumped in $6,000 to get it, and all wrapped up in shame. And the good news feels so good in that case. Wow. That really does a number on one psyche. I can imagine it keeps you busy as someone with an anthropology background.
Yeah. I mean, it's that anthropology background, such as it is that kind of drew me to this kind of realm. Like people are often like, "Oh, well, have you always been interested in marine biology?" And I'm like, I was never still interested in marine biology per se.
I'm interested. 9-year-old into that or what? I was.
I'm interested in this stuff, but I was mostly interested in this weird frontier where there are these people that live very differently, and that interests me most.
I think that reads very strongly. I mean, you definitely reference this in the book too, especially in the introduction, but it does seem to be a very human-centered book. One might expect this to be more environmentally oriented, but that seems to be a secondary subject area relative to just how humans treat one another in this environment.
Yeah, I mean, and again, it's not because I just felt like if you're trying to do storytelling, like you can write an article or you can write a story. And an article is sort of stacked facts, right? I wrote a lot of those at the Times. They're important. They serve a purpose. But there's no narrative arc. There's no main characters. Not really a clear beginning, middle, and the end. A lot of it's expository, explanatory stuff, right? And I just personally don't think that moves the needle and grabs people as much as narrative. And if you're going to do narrative, you need humans. If you need humans, and you probably need a way into this space. So, and then the back end can be, oh, by the way, this thing that's happening out here has broader consequences such for marine life and for the existence of the planet. Let's talk about those too. But I feel like that's better left from my view as backdrop to a human-centric story.
What's changed since the election and inauguration?
What hasn't? I mean, the world.
We're open-ended question. Any way you like.
Yeah, I mean, in my space, I mean, I think a lot has changed in the big sense of the word: civility, democracy, the fate of journalism, the existential status of truth. Like these things are all, I think, seeing changes in our country, and that scares me. But I won't head there. More narrowly on my subject matter, things have gotten a lot harder. I mean, things that science fairly well established as fact, and therefore you could move ahead from there and get to other facts, now are not even mentionables, right? So like, climate change, the climate crisis, as a reality that we're no longer debating, but rather we're going to cover the real world impacts, solutions, arguments over what to do about it. Now we're back at like, we're not supposed to mention climate. I'm not running into this. I'm my own boss, and the editors I deal with are not of this ilk, but it is the ether of current mentality. And it's certainly the case that all of the sources I used to turn to in the government are scared shitless, and like, they're not as inclined to talk with me about things until they figure out what their fate is, in terms of having a job or in terms of what the priorities of the political administration that will run them now are. So, whereas you could talk about human rights abuses on Chinese vessels before, now if we're going to bring up Chinese vessels, it's in a geopolitical hawkish context, but the human stuff isn't really the entrance, even if it might arguably be more important. These are the sorts of shifts I'm seeing in terms of positioning the journalism into venues that will publish them or talking to sources.
Now, I could see that maybe happening with the Washington Post editorial page changes, but you would think with the Gray Lady probably would be unshakable on this. Is that not the case?
I don't really write for the Gray Lady anymore. I mean, not because I don't love her and she didn't teach me everything I knew, but because when I left, one of my goals was to broaden my partners, if you will, and sort of be in a polygamous, situation where I have as many different publishing outlets as possible. Maybe that's... I
said it's down this wrong track with
when you cut this out and take it out of context, I'm going to be divorced by my wife. But no, I mean, I think we do at the Boston Globe, the LA Times. I just got off a call with Nat Geo, like all these big tier one venues that we provide content to. All of them are sort of, the bosses up high are still trying to figure out what they can say and not get acute pushback on.
Pushback from whom?
I don't know. I mean, now I'm out of my depth. Honestly, it's not because I'm afraid to say it. It's just because I don't like talking about things I don't know really what I'm talking about. I'm intuiting a lot. And what I can say at the level of intuition, probably 4 people removed from the people I'm describing, is that I do sense a certain fear among journalism outfits, legacy tier 1 outfits. I'm smelling a sense of fear and uncertainty about what coverage should look like and what things should say. But can I be more concrete than that? Probably not. I'm not afraid to if I have more to say. I'm sensing that there is a fear about like what feels good to run. I'll give you one example. There's a paper I was talking about yesterday. I won't say which one, but they've undergone a huge amount of tumult. Tier 1 shop, their main editor just took a buyout. A new editor's come in their place. I had a meeting with them. Hey, we've got this huge package. Here's I want you to look at it. You guys interested in running it? We're a cheap date. It's free, et cetera, et cetera. All the standard things. And this new editor said the new folks that have the direction of the paper is going local, and they've gutted their foreign desk, and they are undergoing a mandate to try to be very, very local in all the stories they cover. So this piece that I was offering them had one component that was about seasteading and tech folks and libertarians, and they were like, we'd like to lead the story with that, as opposed to the story being largely about the largest seagrass field in the world and all this other stuff, which was previously the lead. And they were like, could we switch it around because this lead will speak more to a local audience? And I was like, well, but that's kind of a weird sidelight, not the lead of the story. And I'm not sure that it feels comfortable to turn it upside down. That's what I mean. Like, there is a shifting of priorities and attention based on readers, perceived readers.
What did Russia Today think?
I didn't pitch at them. Again, I'll take eyeballs anywhere. If you don't edit my copy, then I'll publish in Russia Today.
Wow. What is happening with the seasteading folks? I mean, I did a show on seasteading years ago, and there's always been a strong tension between how ecologically oriented projects like that can be versus how succession oriented in a way that might turn people's stomachs, and I think there's versions of each that are present. What's happening now? It's been a while since I've checked in on them.
Yeah, I mean, I only checked in recently because we've been working on this piece about a place no one's ever heard of called the Siyadamala Bank, which is this Switzerland-sized plot of high seas between Seychelles and Mauritius, and it's the largest seagrass field in the world, and it's getting obliterated by industrial fishing. And it's in the high seas, and no one's paying attention to it, and it's this really interesting place. And among the many things that have happened there has been 2 bouts with seasteaders, very of the typical mold, super wealthy, libertarian types who wanted to kind of create a new community from scratch and get away from taxes and whatever else they were trying to get away from. So that's why I went back to it, because this place had a guy who just died about a month and a half, 2 months ago, I think, who is on the run from the law, a billionaire, American, lived in Italy, a guy named Landy, who was trying to create a seastead. He had bought a barge and he had sort of set it up off the coast of UAE or Qatar, and he was going to kind of refine his plan and then move it to the Siyadamala Bank, but a rogue wave hit his vessel and it sunk, and a bunch of them died. Wow. So, but that's interesting in that, like, that is the fate that a lot of these ambitions, love them or hate them, meet, which is that, like, the reality of removal, the hidden costs and the strains of the conditions out in these far off places are often underestimated. And just like I said, the hidden costs of, there's a reason society has developed to where it is now, right? Cops and fire and roads and, like, pooled monies called taxes that pay for services we all benefit from make sense from a civilization point of view, even if it's burdensome to have to pay the taxes. The seasteaders, I think, oftentimes underestimate that variable, and then when they start creating a new society where taxes are lower or non-existent, they're like, wait, but what are we going to do when there's a crime? Or, like, they start reinventing the wheel of, like, public services, and that's coupled with the conditions of transporting food and things like that out, just catch up with these projects, and they often fail. There are very few that have succeeded.
You don't wake up dreaming of McDonald's fries. You wake up dreaming of McDonald's hash browns. McDonald's breakfast comes first. Ba-da-ba-ba-ba.
I can say to my new Samsung Galaxy S25 Ultra, hey, find a keto-friendly restaurant nearby and text it to Beth and Steve. And it does, without me lifting a finger. So I can get in more squats anywhere I can. 1, 2, 3.
Will that be cash or credit?
Credit. 4.
Galaxy S25 Ultra, the AI companion that does the heavy lifting so you can do you. Get yours at Samsung.com. Compatible with select apps. Requires Google Gemini account. Results may vary based on input. Check responses for accuracy.
Among the archetypal seasteaders that you're describing, I think there'll be probably less desire for that, at least for the next couple of years, because the people I know that support that approach tend to be very favorable towards Trump.
Yeah.
The more progressive seasteaders I know, they probably see more reason to get out on the sea. But among the more conservative or libertarian ones, I don't think they're going to be taking to the high seas in as great a frequency or strongly.
Yeah.
Has changed
Or they're
now.
waiting on Elon to get the shuttle to Mars. Like, that's a quintessential seastead, right? It's just out of space. But it's the same demographic. It's a super wealthy kind of libertarian tech type who wants to get away and do things differently, if I'm being very generous to the philosophy.
You are trying to be generous.
I'm trying.
Do you follow much in the world of ocean iron fertilization?
Not hugely. I mean, I wrote about it in the book of that one experiment and cast a pretty skeptical eye in the book, as you know, on it. Many years have passed since that, and have there been more promising possibilities of geoengineering that actually could, like, help save us from the climate crisis? I don't know. I frankly don't know. I don't want to assume that all models are terrible models. I kind of want to be careful about that inertial perspective. I think the model I focused on was seemingly perilous from the people I trusted that I talked to about it, but I don't know if it's still being attempted anywhere.
I mean, you primarily cover the Russ George Haida Gwaii example, right?
Yeah.
I meet people sometimes who have a revisionist take on that experiment, said he had permission from the Haida people and he got great data and the experiment broadly worked. Of course, it led to the London Protocol banning commercial exploration of this entire area. So some people are salty about that. But I don't know. It seems like it has a mixed legacy. But I'm also speaking with people who think ocean iron fertilization could be a climate silver bullet. And this is from a community of people who basically say we need silver buckshot and silver bullets do not exist. But some of these people are like OIF or nothing. And I always find that to be a really interesting take. More work is being done on this now too. Woods Hole is doing research on OIF right now. I'm not sure if it might be worth another look. I'm trying to basically get you back on this beat. Please write some more about it.
I mean, I like your metaphor, silver bullet, silver buckshot. And I feel like there is wisdom in the notion of we're in a pretty serious situation and there are going to be risks with every move we could make, including the don't do anything. That's really risky. So, I owe it to the topic to go back and try to open my ears to a diversity of smart folks and see what they're saying now.
I am trying to maintain an open mind, and I always hope that climate solutions are not as crazy as they sound, and they might actually have something there. But I feel like I've been burned a couple times before too, and so I'm also wary. It's good to have a little bit of distance, I think.
Yeah, I guess, and one philosophical thing that I often feel is true and probably lasting, because I've seen it enough, is that oftentimes the best solutions sometimes the best solutions are the hardest solutions, and they may be undramatic, but they are kind of glossed over because they're not easy. And degrowth and conservation are hard, but they have a huge logic. Like, we are just consuming too much in the sort of disposable economy and the Amazon purchasing phenomena that we're in now. And I do wonder sometimes with these silver buckshot, silver bullet solutions, whether they're just like elaborate, kind of workarounds to avoid degrowth, like slowing purchase, reusing, these sorts of things, with all the standard concerns about recycling doesn't work, etc. But just thinking about ways that we could consume less and keep things longer, that just doesn't get a lot of attention because it seems very Carter-esque, an old school, could be true nonetheless.
Probably true in the ocean as well. Although I've also seen proposals that have really interested me about tradable fishing quotas being a way of introducing private property and fisheries in a way that might encourage a longer view rather than this race to the bottom. Get as much as you can because the next guy isn't going to care as much. Is there anything to that these days? Is there still an active debate on that?
I'm going to plead the fifth on that. I don't know anything about it, so I won't touch it.
Oh, okay. I'll send you some things I've seen in the past that have taught me some. It's an interesting area. I think it applies to some fisheries and not others, but yeah, I won't force you to break the Fifth Amendment. As long as we still have it, I don't want to force you to break it. What stories are you looking forward to now? Well, looking forward to is probably the wrong way, but what are you working on? And I imagine people listening may want to support your work. What would their donations support now?
No, I appreciate it. outlawOcean.com, donate button at the top. Pretty easy to give what you want. A lot of folks are like, oh, well, there's a Substack link. And if you want to, we like folks, it's all free, but it says hey, if you want to toss something in, you could do that too and help through Substack. But Substack is sort of how we alert folks when we have something to say. And we're working on bigger projects now. After the big China project, I realized, sort of decidedly slow journalism, bigger targets is how we can distinguish ourselves from the dailies and weekly magazines. Working on a big project about the fish meal industry, fish meal and fish oil, a fifth, a fourth, depending on your metric, of all marine life pulled out of the ocean ends up not for human consumption, but for feed, especially aquaculture, but chickens and pigs too. And sort of, it's a very, very dark supply chain. We know some about where our food comes, less about where our seafood in particular comes, but where the feed that goes into our animals comes from is very dark. And so we're going to try to crack the code on that, like map the entire industry globally, figure out where all the plants are, where they're getting their fish from, where they're shipping the feed to, what does it end up producing that people eat, etc. That's a big target. We're 2 years in. We probably have another year or a half to go. I'm eager to do a big project on the poles. I just think like it feels there's some really interesting, funky stuff happening at both poles. It's very much like Outlaw Ocean in the sense that it's this weird liminal space with legal ambiguity, kind of like outer space, and there's all sorts of geopolitical and other like biopharmaceutical exploration, just funky stuff happening, rocket launches and satellite firms up there. And so I'm shopping around for U.S. Navy and other NATO, folk to see if anyone can get me on a sub, because that would be the way to tell that story. I know the guy that got an embed on a nuclear sub for the New York Times, so I know that it can be done. And so I'm trying to orchestrate that to do a story like that, and then doing some stuff on the South Korean, Taiwanese fleets, and some specific questions about their squid fleets and what they're up to. And then we just have a lot of stuff going on. Like we make stories. We're a story factory, right? We do the journalism, but the place that's really radical and weird is not in the story production, but in the distribution of it. And so we have like all these, half of my staff is just with how do we take this body of really good reporting and convert it into different forms: murals, music, video game, animation, rap album, stage performance, like all sorts of weird things where we convert the journalism into other forms to try to get people to pay attention.
Wow. That's fascinating. Okay. Glad to hear of all those opportunities to absorb your reportage. I want to ask a question. It might sound a bit flattering.
Oh no, please don't.
I know, I'm blushing a little bit. A lot of the stories you named are with not savory groups and countries that can be relatively intimidating, that you're almost certainly on some lists. They probably watch you in areas. Where do you get the courage to do work like this? It seems intimidating work to pursue.
Well, I mean, thanks. You're giving me a large benefit of the doubt. I would.
Are you actually a coward?
No, I would humbly submit that it's not courage.
Okay.
It may not be cowardice either. It's probably something in between. I think it's when I try to like soberly reflect on what motivates me as if I'm analyzing someone else, the best answer that feels true to me is that I enjoy the work because it feels like it has impact in a way that nothing else in my career has had. It gets me into a space that I find scary and marvelous, including conflict zones, but also at sea that are just wide. As a journalist, you're curious. I do not think I'm an adrenaline junkie. I don't enjoy danger at all. But I am a junkie of novelty, and in places that few people get to go. That gives me a high, and there's a lot of that in this reporting. But I think the thing that most motivates me to keep doing it is, truth be told, a sort of almost Catholic guilt, like the sense that a discomfort with the whispering voice that says, you had the lottery at birth, you were born into this very lucky life of yours, and you're okay with all those people about not having lucked out on the lottery. Is that okay with you to just live in your isolated way? And that whispering voice has haunted me my whole life. And my journalism is an attempt to try to keep it at bay. Like, okay. I'm going back out and I'm going to do my service, of trying to do it in the way I can. I'm not working in refugee camps. But I am doing this journalism, and I'm trying to be honest, not an advocate, but I am trying to do journalism that helps fix things that are wrong. And if that means going to unsavory places, then where I can do the most stuff, then that's what I do. And these days, that's kind of what I do.
Have you felt yourself entangled in geopolitics or just some of the great power rivalries that are shaping up? Is that something that concerns you at all, or does that feel just the same as reporting about something more criminal and smaller scale?
No, I mean, I'll give you a concrete example. So in the last big project we did, which was taking a global look at the Chinese distant water fishing fleet, we reported at sea, high seas Galapagos, high seas near Falkland Islands, the border with North Korea, so South Korean waters right at the border, and then coast of West Africa. The high seas Galapagos trip, we left one of the Galapagos Islands on a big vessel, went way out in international waters to the fishing grounds, 250, Chinese vessels in a 50-mile radius, and spent quite a while talking our way on board, and talking to captains and filming them and doing the whole thing. And we don't engage in illegality. We don't unilaterally board. We don't engage in deception in those contexts. If we always just say we're journalists and here's what we're doing, and then we try to convince them to let us on board. And we get lucky, and folks are kind. Chinese captains are as weirded out and confused and curious about us being there and eager to tell their story about the important work they do. Okay, so we had a very successful trip, high seas near Galapagos. We come back in, we're met by 2 Ecuadorian Navy vessels, and very aggressively on the radio, you move, 20 meters more, we're going to open fire. We're coming on board. They come on board armed, whole thing. They arrest me, my crew, my team, the crew. They say, you have to turn around, you can't come to port. And we say, we don't have enough supplies. We have to, this is illegal. You can't send us back out to sea. We don't have enough water. So I call the U.S. ambassador, get him involved. We negotiate a port entry. And they say, okay, you got to get out of the country in 48 hours. We're going to escort you. The ship's got to be out of port in 72 hours. Blah, blah. Okay. All this is reported and well documented. I do spend the next 6 months digging into what the hell happened there. We boarded Chinese vessels. The captains then dutifully called their corporate, CEOs and said, hey, we had some Westerners on board. The companies were like, you did what? And they report to the party. The party reports up the chain. Chain calls their friends in Ecuador and says, hey, there are these guys out there, U.S. flag vessel, that are boarding our vessels. They didn't unilaterally board, but we don't love it. Don't let those guys back in port. And so they lean on Ecuador. And don't forget, Ecuador's got huge financial ties with China, as they should. They're playing both sides, us and China. But that we were completely meat grinded from that clash. China did not want more bad press on their fleet, and they had taken a whooping in 2020 when there was a lot of news coverage about their fleet being near the Galapagos. So they had pulled way back, and now supposedly some journalist was boarding them again in 2024. And so they were like, oh, this is really bad. Let's push these guys back. So that's an example of where it does catch up with you in the reporting.
Wow. Even in the way that you described the Chinese captains, it seems like it would be easier not to have sympathy for someone that is probably not fishing in the most harmonious way possible. How important is sympathy for your subjects in journalism for you?
I think it's kind of fundamental. I think if you start out from the perspective that most people are good, and those who are bad are probably not all bad, right? Like if you try to carry that around with you as your default, I think you're probably, number one, living in an accurate space. Like that's probably, in my view, the truth about the world. And number two, you're also, I think, on the right footing journalistically to start there. It's especially true with the Chinese captains as Gambian captains, as American captains. I think at the end of the day, the captains typically are pretty poor grunts that are working pretty hard. They're often older. This is all they know how to do. Now, interesting side story. I'm in Thailand. I'm doing the original series for the Times, and I'm honing in on captains who I know from having interviewed with workers of theirs that they systematically beat their crew, and they do so really quite by design. And I'm like, I need to talk to those captains, and I want to hear why. I want to hear from their perspective why it's justified and why it's logical. Like, even if I think it's completely wrong, it doesn't much matter if I can represent them. And they're not going to represent themselves well. I'm like their lawyer, even though they don't maybe deserve one or whatever. Like you might say, like, they do deserve one. And so I spent weeks chasing these captains and learned, okay, a lot of them are, what I learned justified why it's good to have empathy methodologically, which is a lot of these captains are over 55. They're on a vessel where these are Thai captains in this case, but they have maybe 4 officers that are also Thai. And then they have a crew of maybe 30 under 25 migrant crew. Okay, look at those numbers. Like, that's like a slave plantation. Like, the odds are the slaves can overthrow the plantation masters, except for the fact that there are 4 of them and they have guns. But even still, if you coordinated, you could probably still beat them. Some 2 or 3 of you are going to take bullets. But like, okay, so by the same logic, you're a ship captain, you're worried about mutiny, and the numbers add up, and the mutinies do happen. So you're like, I need to show them who's boss from the get-go. So I'm going to do preemptive, sort of performative violence so that they're scared shitless of me and my bosun and my officers. And I'm also going to like figure out who are the rabble rousers, and I'm going to aim at them first. Like, that makes total sociological sense, right? Like, for survival tactics of the captain, I don't agree with it. It's completely unethical and illegal, but it's like never going to be something I would have found out just talking to crew, right? I'm not going to understand their perspective. And it's just damn interesting, right? Like, readers want to know that if it's there to be known. So I just think like you kind of have to assume that there's stuff you don't know, and you might get at if you approach people humanely, even if you think you probably don't like them or agree with them.
Thanks for being here, Ian.
Thank you for having me.